Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. On this week's episode, we bring you Korvold, Fae-Cursed King, out of Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks at a $100 budget. Korvold is 2, a black, a red, and a green for legendary creature Dragon Noble with flying. Whenever Korvold, Fae-Cursed King enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. Korvold plays really well in an aristocrat style deck where we focus on sacrificing our other permanents to generate value over the course of the game. Some ways that we can generate value is sacrificing permanents to draw cards off of Korvold's ability, and also by draining our opponents out with some creatures that we'll go over on later in the video. There's a lot of interaction in this deck because it is in Jund colors, which includes a lot of creature destruction, board wipes, and removal. There's also a lot of synergy with creating tokens when other permanents that we control die, and we will lean heavily into that strategy so that we can use those tokens to generate even more value when we sacrifice them to Korvold's ability and other sacrifice outlets that we have in this deck. Let's start out this deck tech by talking about all the ways that we're able to ramp in this deck. So first up, we have Farhaven Elf. It's 2 and a green for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then there's also Wood Elves, which does the same thing, except you can search for any forest card and put it onto the battlefield untapped. Sakura Tribe Elder is 1 and a green for a creature. You can sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Sakura Tribe Elder is really great because when you sacrifice it with Korvold on the battlefield, you will be able to draw a card as well. Then we have Springbloom Druid. 2 and a green for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. And then the non-creature version of that is Harrow. It's 2 and a green. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sack a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield untapped, then shuffle your library. These are really great early in the game as they will ramp you, but if you draw them late in the game, they'll also give you a sacrifice trigger with Korvold on the battlefield and help you draw an additional card off of it. Then we have Wayfarer's Bubble. It's 1 colorless for an artifact. You can pay 2 and sack it. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. Then we have Mindstone. It's 2 colorless. Tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. You can pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice it to draw a card. Then Commander Sphere is 3 colorless for an artifact. Tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity to your mana pool, and then you can sacrifice it to draw a card. These are also really great with Korvold in the battlefield as you can sacrifice them to draw even more cards off of them. We also included several mana dorks in this deck, as we do really want to get our commander onto the battlefield early. So we have Llanowar Elves, Finhorde Elves, and Elvish Mystic. They all cost 1 green mana and tap to add a green to your mana pool. And then we have Elves of the Deep Shadow. It's 1 green for a creature, and you can tap it to add a black to your mana pool. Elves of Deep Shadow deals 1 damage to you. The most important component of this deck is having a lot of sacrifice outlets, so we can sacrifice our creatures and other permanents to pump our Korvold up, draw some additional cards, and gain some additional value off of them. We included quite a few of them in this deck. First being Goblin Bombardment. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This gives you a way to turn some of your tokens into additional damage and draw some extra cards off of Korvold. Then we have Viscera Seer. It's 1 black mana for a creature, and it says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. And then there's Carrion Feeder. 1 black mana for a creature that can't block, and sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder. Then we have Ashnod's Altar. Sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Of the sacrifice outlets, this is one of the most powerful ones, as you can sacrifice your creatures to turn them into additional resources which you can use to play even more creatures or more spells in a turn. Then we have Altar of Dementia. 2 colorless for an artifact. Sacrifice a creature. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. And then there's Evolutionary Leap. 1 and a green for an enchantment. Pay a green mana, sacrifice a creature. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. These are all really great ways to sack some of your creatures that you don't need or some of your tokens to gain some additional value by drawing cards off of Korvold and making him bigger in the process. Then we have Elvish Reclaimer. 1 green for a creature. It gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard, and you can pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice a land. Search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. One thing to note here is it will search your library for any land card. It doesn't have to be a basic land, so you can get anything out of your deck with this card. This is a very powerful card to include. And then we have Priest of the Forgotten Gods. 1 and a black for a creature. You can tap it to sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. You add 2 black to your mana pool and draw a card. This is another very powerful sacrifice outlet. You can change in 2 tokens and get a lot of value off of them. One of the better engine cards for drawing cards in this deck is Smothering Abomination. It's 2 black for a creature that's devoid. It has no color and it has flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. This works really great with Korvold, as if you sacrifice a creature with Smothering Abomination on the field and Korvold, you're going to draw 2 cards. And then it also works well when you sacrifice a creature to Korvold's ability as well. You'll draw 2 more cards also. Since we have a lot of token generation in this deck, you are going to have plenty of expendable creatures that you can sacrifice to these abilities. We included a couple of interactive creatures in this deck that make us and an opponent sacrifice a creature, and they're Merciless Executioner, Fleshbag Marauder, and Plaguecrafter. They all do pretty much the same thing. When they enter the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Plaguecrafter gives the extra ability where your opponent could sacrifice a Planeswalker as well, and if they can't, they have to discard a card. In our deck, these are pretty one-sided, as we can play out the Merciless Executioner and sacrifice it to itself, and then your opponent has to sacrifice one of their creatures. If you do have Korvold on the battlefield, you'll also get a draw trigger off of it. So this is almost like a free card draw spell and removal spell all in one. So we need some win conditions in this deck, as we will be sacrificing creatures to gain some additional value. And a really great way that we can capitalize on that is with cards that whenever a creature dies, you can drain your opponent for 1 life. And we included all of those in this deck. And the first one is Zulaport Cutthroat. It's 1 and a black for a creature. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is one of the more powerful ones in the deck, as it does drain all of your opponents at one time. Then there's Blood Artist, which is 1 and a black for a creature. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The really cool thing about Blood Artist is it triggers off of any creature dying, not just your creatures, so it will trigger off of your opponent's creatures dying as well. It only targets 1 player at a time. Then there's Vindictive Vampire. It's 3 and a black for a creature. Whenever another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. Then we have Judith the Scourge Diva. 1 a black and a red for a legendary creature. Other creatures you control get +1/+0. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. Judith is a really powerful card, as she will pump all of your tokens up, which we do have a lot of in this deck, and she can deal the damage to any target. Doesn't have to be to your opponents, so she can start mowing down creatures as well. And then we have Sir Conrad the Grim, which is a new one out of Throne of Eldraine. It's 3 black for a legendary creature. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. You can pay 1 and a black, and each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Then we have Poison Tip Archer. 2 a black, a green for a creature with reach. It has Death Touch. Whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Then we have Falconwrath Noble. 3 and a black for a creature with flying. Whenever Falconwrath Noble or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is basically the same thing as Blood Artist, but costs a couple extra mana. Then there's Mayhem Devil, which is another new one out of War of the Spark. It's 1 a black, a red. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. This does trigger off your opponent sacrificing a permanent too. So if you play something like Plaguecrafter and you and your opponents all sacrifice something, Mayhem Devil will deal a lot of damage off of that. The next card I want to talk about is Journey to Eternity. It's 1 a black and a green for legendary enchantment. Enchant creature you control. When enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control, then return Journey to Eternity to the battlefield transformed under your control. This is a really great way of getting a creature back when it dies, and you can put this on a creature that you're about to sacrifice to, which will die, and then you can bring it back. And it's going to transform into Atzal, Cave of Eternity. It's a legendary land, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and you can pay 3 a black and a green to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a great way of getting creatures back that may have died over the course of the game to put them straight back onto the battlefield to reuse them later. Being in Jund colors means that we have a lot of interaction in dealing with our opponent's permanents and creatures. So first up we have Beast Within. It's 2 and a green for an instant. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. This is one of the only cards in our colors that deals with all permanents on the board and can get rid of any problematic permanent that you face. The only downside is it does make a 3/3 beast token for your opponent. Then we have Dreadbore. It's a black and a red for a sorcery, destroy target creature or planeswalker. And then there's Bedevil, black, black, red, destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. We have a couple of creatures that allow us to destroy a target artifact or enchantment when we sacrifice them, and having the sacrifice ability on the creature is actually an upside instead of a downside. And the first one is Caustic Caterpillar. It's a green mana for a creature. You can pay 1 and a green and sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And then Thrashing Bronodon is 1 green green and it has the same exact ability on it, except you pay just a colorless mana for it. Next up we have Terminate. It's a black and a red for an instant, destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Putrefy does the same thing for 1 a black and a green, except you can also get rid of an artifact with it. And then Death Sprout is 1 black, black, green for an instant, destroy target creature. You can search your land for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. These are all really great ways of dealing with problematic permanents that you may face over the course of the game. Token generators are extremely important to this deck, as we do want to have a lot of fuel to sacrifice to not only Korvold, but all of our sacrifice outlets that we have in the deck. If you have something like Goblin Bombardment on the battlefield with a bunch of tokens, you can sacrifice those tokens and deal a lot of damage to your opponents and draw a lot of cards if your Korvold's out too. So first up we have From Beyond. It's 3 and a green for an enchantment with Devoid. This card has no color. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. You can pay 1 and a green and sacrifice From the Beyond to search your library for an Eldrazi card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Then there's Awakening Zone, which is very similar to From the Beyond. It's 2 and a green. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. With sack this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Then there's Dreadhorde Invasion, 1 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1. And to amass is to put a 1/1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control one, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. Whenever a zombie token you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gets lifelink until end of turn. Then we have Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog, which both do the same thing. Whenever a creature you control dies, you're going to put a token onto the battlefield. Sifter of Skulls makes Eldrazi Scion tokens, which are 1/1s, and then Pawn of Ulamog makes Eldrazi Spawn tokens, which are 0/1s, and you can sacrifice both of them to add colorless mana to your mana pool. Then there's Ulvenwald Mysteries, 2 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. And then to investigate is to put a colorless clue artifact token onto the battlefield with pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. This is a really nice card as it will help you draw some additional cards and also put some tokens onto the battlefield, which is really great. Then there's Azoni Thousand-Eyed, 2 black, black, green, green for legendary creature with Undergrowth. When Azoni enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. And this also has a sacrifice outlet attached to it, which is really powerful. You can pay a black and a green to sacrifice another creature, you gain a life and draw a card. Then there's Chittering Witch, 3 and a black for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 black rat creature tokens equal to the number of opponents you have. So if you have 3 opponents, it'll create 3 rats. And you can pay 1 and a black to sacrifice a creature. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. One thing to note here is it doesn't say that you have to sacrifice a rat, so you can sacrifice any of your creatures to use that ability. This is another great token generator and sacrifice outlet for this deck. The next card's a really powerful one if you're playing a token strategy, and it's Skull Clamp. It's 1 colorless mana for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. When equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. It has an equip cost of 1. If you're playing in a token strategy where your tokens have 1 toughness, this is one of the best cards that you can put into your deck, as every token that you equip with Skull Clamp will die and you'll draw 2 cards. It just generates a lot of value over the course of the game. With Korvold, there is a lot of synergy with making treasure tokens in this deck. Treasure tokens are artifacts that you can sacrifice to add a mana of any color to your mana pool, and Korvold synergizes with sacrificing permanents, so we did include several ways of making treasures in this deck to fuel our sacrifice theme. And the first is Pitiless Plunderer. It's 3 and a black for a creature. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap and sacrifice it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This has a lot of synergies with our deck, as we will be sacrificing a lot of creatures, and we do have a lot of ways of taking advantage of creatures that we sacrifice. And then we have Revel in Riches, 4 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a treasure. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. This card combined with Pitiless Plunderer makes it extremely easy to get 10 or more treasures, and you can win the game with your Revel in Riches. And then we have Brass's Bounty. It's a sorcery for 6 and a red. It's going to make a treasure token for each land you control. These cards paired together make it extremely easy to get 10 treasures to win the game with Revel in Riches, and it also will fuel your Korvold and gain you some additional value over the course of the game. Thank you so much for watching this Budget Deck Tech today. If you have any suggestions for some of the picks in this deck or agree with or disagree with some of the choices, let us know in the comments down below. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and check us out on Patreon over at patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a lot of different tiers for rewards over on Patreon. See you guys next time.